Chair. I'm going to do very gentle moderation, as little as possible. Thank you. You didn't have to take the cranky thing quite that serious. All right, now, please know there are microphones down at the front here. We want you to use them. And not what I said before about conversation. This is meant to be the beginning of 2 days of conversation. So don't be shy. Come down and use the microphones whenever you want. We're just going to kick things off by me asking Wendell to start us with recounting some of his discussions with the previous mayor of Louisville about local food systems and about how that kind of got things going on local food systems here. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I don't know who this guy is. Some guy named Wendell Berry. That's Congressman Chellie Pingree from Maine and Mayor Greg Fischer of Louisville. I'm very sorry.
You got all the help you need.
Exactly. Local food systems, Louisville.
All right, well, it wasn't as if we just walked into the mayor's office and presented ourselves and our proposals. At the time we got started in the conversation that finally led to the mayor, Lois Matus was the vice president at Brown-Forman. I've always said in charge of doing good, because she did a lot of good. But she had access to a small dining room out at the Brown-Forman company. And we started wondering what to do with their spent mash. But that went on to more serious talk about the farmers' need for urban allies, which was becoming clear, but also the need for a local food economy, which in my mind has always been the first step toward a local economy, because the only effective defense of a locality against the global economy is a local economy. The global economy is a lot older than its name. It goes back to about 1492, and its purpose has always been to take out of any locality anywhere everything that was valuable, including more and more the brightest young people. So we had this series of ineffective conversations that felt useless because Lois would bring in a bunch of us country people, and she'd bring in people in charge of this or that, or real estate people in Louisville, all with ideas, none of which led to a second conversation. Obviously, to start a conversation with the regional country people, we needed to get to the mayor. And finally, the mayor did attend one of our meetings. And our question to him was, why should Louisville be sitting in the middle of fertile, potentially productive farmland, that is to say, potentially capable of feeding Louisville, and be dependent at the same time on the longest possible supply lines? For a militarist country always at war, we pay startlingly little attention to supply lines. But the point about long supply lines is that they're vulnerable at many points along the way. And the question to the mayor was, how are you going to feel if the supply lines to the Central Valley of California are cut? What are you going to tell your people? I'm sorry? So The local food effort got to be established in city government. It got to be a part of the economic development branch of city government. And then we got a new mayor. And I was wondering how that would turn out. We had a sort of an informal bunch of us by that time, county agents, county judge executives, and so on, who were meeting on an informal basis to talk about this. And we met with Mayor Fischer. And I was amazed to find that Mayor Fischer knew all about this local food effort and understood perfectly its importance. So you see, along the way, we contracted some debts to people who helped out, and I think Lois Matus was the head hero in this effort. The phrase that Woody used in his opening remarks this morning that caught my attention, it was shared risk. And Mary, a while ago, used the word cooperation. And these are the key concepts, I think. Either we are of the market or we are of the community. And this is an effort to the local economy effort is an effort to shift from an economy based on competition in which the strongest take the most to a cooperative economy in which the risks and the benefits are democratically shared. And I'll just give you an example of what I'm talking about, an easy one. If you are a person of the market and you have farmland to rent, you rent it at a set price, at the market price. The grower takes over, and whatever happens, he owes you the money. But at a meeting at the Land Institute, I met a fine old farmer, Tom Brown, he was a retired farmer. He had his land to rent, and he rented it on the shares. He rented it for 50% of whatever the grower made. You see, this is shared risk. It's sharing fate. This is the community principle. If the grower made money, Tom Brown made money. If the grower lost money, Tom Brown lost money. And it was a risk he took in honor of a fine principle.
Mayor, do you want to try to affirm Wendell's assessment that you understand all this stuff?
Well, that makes my month, possibly, so thank you, Wendell. I appreciate that. We've had a beautiful partnership to really try to figure out this journey together. First off, a local food economy is the most natural thing that can possibly happen in your community. And as I took office about 4 years ago, there was a lot of disconnects and a lot of talk about it, but it seemed like it was something that was so natural to come together that if we could help in any way with city government, we wanted to do that. I'm a business person that just happens to be mayor, so I was interested in the supply and demand aspect behind this, because a lot of people say they want more, but the question is, where does it come from? And are the people producing it able to make a living over a long period of time so that we can ensure that future supply? So I don't mean to sound technical, but I mean, if that basic thing is not happening, we got a problem, because it's unsustainable. And from a city standpoint, what we want is something that's natural and authentic, so that when people live in our community or visit our community, they will say, wow, there's some uniqueness to that place. I want to live there, I want to go back there, I want to brag about it, I want to start my business. So from a mayor's standpoint, it's the most natural thing to do, to put a highlight on what is unique to your particular place. So one of the critical steps that we took, because people, there's an affection for local food, and people can romanticize it, and people that are well off go to nice restaurants and eat local food and like seeing the farmers' names on the menu and all this, and go home and feel good about themselves. But if it's not a healthy system, it doesn't matter. So we started diving down into that, and the natural question was, how much demand is there for local food? Because it's easy to supply the system from a boutique type of perspective, and let's call that farmers markets and nice restaurants. But how do we scale up the system? One, could be for security reasons, as Wendell talked about, but two, to produce a real local economy that is filled with healthy jobs, good middle-income jobs. In my view, that's the biggest threat in our country right now, is the erosion of middle-income jobs. So how could the food economy be part of this? So we conducted a demand study and found that we consume about $2 billion worth of food in Louisville every year. About $300 million of that is termed local food, and there's demand for $800 million for that. So a $500 million gap. That's a great market opportunity for our farmers, but how do you bring that supply and demand together, one apple at a time, or one carrot at a time? This is hard, because there has to be trust built between the farmer and the consumer, and especially then as we scale this up into our hospitals, into our school systems, the really large volume users of this. Interestingly, when we did this survey, we found that everybody from every socioeconomic level in the city supported local food. Why? One, they wanted to help their local businesses. So the perspective that the farmer is a business, that to me was a breakthrough. And then the second was they just thought local food is healthier for us and for the planet at the same time. So while that was just a couple sentences in this survey, that was like, that's pretty powerful stuff. So now where we're at is figuring out how to bring this extra $500 million worth of supply into our food system to where it's an ongoing, viable, healthy, financially beneficial opportunity for our farmers and for the consumers. And in summary, what that then does is make us even more of a natural and authentic system in our city. On top of that, and I'll close with this, we've had this unexpected ally appear. And this is one of our food groups that's been around for a long time in Kentucky, and hopefully you will have the opportunity to enjoy it while you're here. And this food group is called bourbon, okay? Bourbon is hot. We've created a word called bourbonism. And bourbonism is the act of visiting Kentucky to enjoy bourbon and local food. So this puts, So bourbon is an agricultural product. 95% of the world's bourbon comes from Kentucky, and the other 5% is counterfeit, so stay away from that. But so seriously now, we're developing a 52-week-a-year tourism experience around bourbon that then becomes agriculturally and rural-based as well. So it increases the highlight and opportunity for us to discuss the whole local food movement along with this bourbon tourism. So while it might seem kind of amusing, it's been extraordinarily helpful and is going to be part of us figuring out the demand and supply chain here.
And moderation in all things.
That's coming from you.
Chellie, so you're not going to talk about Louisville. I believe you're going to talk about Washington and Maine, but you've been very, very active for a long time in issues of local food, so we're anxious to hear your perspectives.
Well, thank you. I did think that you promised me when I sat on the panel that I could just listen to Wendell Berry and nod yes, and that was my entire job. So I'm honored to be here with everyone, and to all of you who are thinking about how to cultivate and support what I think is an incredibly important part, both of our culture and our economic issues in this country. I'll just try to make a couple of points because so much wonderful has already been said. I mean, it's challenging to sit up here as an elected official because already we know that there are huge problems with policy, the Farm Bill, the USDA, you know, all of the things that we worry about forming policy in ways that just haven't worked out for our food system. So sometimes people say to me, you know, why in the world do you keep going to Washington? And I say, good question. On the other hand, if somebody doesn't keep sitting there and fighting the fight, this policy issue we're facing constantly will never get changed. So in that way, I feel very fortunate. So a lot of the issues that we have in our food system are really related to long-term policy that Wendell Berry and so many others speak so eloquently about, and things like the Farm Bill that have become misguided instruments as opposed to helpful instruments to local food, to regional farming, to all the things that we care so much about, getting young farmers engaged in the system. It's been going in the wrong direction. When I came to Congress 6 years ago and we were working on the Farm Bill, I wrote a title to the bill called the Local Farms, Foods, and Jobs Act because of all the things everyone's talking about here, and I thought we needed to get back on that focus and divert some of the resources that were going to big commodities that were going in the wrong direction back into supporting the very things that we have here, whether it's getting young people able to get into the business of farming, traditional farmers to stay there or upgrade their systems or become value-added producers, to move some of the commodity money to crop insurance for the diversified farmer, or helping people with the challenges that they face, making sure that school lunch programs could buy more local food. You know, it's an endless list, all things that you know and care about. So, my primary effort has been on the federal level to figure out how we make some changes in the Farm Bill. Some of the things that were in my title got incorporated into the Farm Bill. We're already on the next round, trying to see if we can make the next Farm Bill more palatable. And I luckily sit on the Agriculture Appropriations Committee, so now I'm working on how do we make sure those funds really go to the right places and the rules get written in the right way, like Food Safety Modernization Act, which you heard Joel talk about yesterday, which can be a huge impediment to some of these local efforts in small farmers. Now, the thing that's really great for me is I didn't come to Congress from a big agricultural state. Traditionally, I didn't come representing one of the commodities, but I'm from New England. I'm from Maine. Now, Maine fed the Union Army, however you feel about the Union Army here in Kentucky, but we were the breadbasket. We've kind of worked out some of those differences, but we were the breadbasket, and New England was. So I've spent 40 years in a very, very small community, maybe even smaller than Wendell's. 400 people live in my town, and I've been a farmer there, and I've worked with my local community. I'm an employer. I know what it is to dig in the soil. I know what it is to eviscerate a chicken. So I can go back to my colleagues and say, hey, I understand the practice of small farming, but also I'm lucky enough to come from a state where the things you're hearing about in Kentucky, and I think we're seeing everywhere else, are happening in spades in my state. Maine has, I think, maybe the largest proportion of CSAs of any state in the country. We are a state where the average age of our farmers is going down, the amount of land under cultivation is going up, and the markets are booming. I think we've produced 50% more food in the last decade than we did in the decade before. So we are really a changing place. And just like the examples of Louisville or many of the places that you come from, and many of the same concerns, how do you make sure our farmers are able to make money? How do you make sure that the markets aren't just for high-end restaurants, but also that you can take your SNAP benefits to the farmer's market and get double the amount that you would normally get under a government program? How do we make sure that this is showing up in school lunches? Portland is another city that's very active in trying to increase the amount of local food served in the school system, but also to have a food plan, to look at this as an important part of the regional economy, and to enhance what we're doing. So the two nice things for me about being a member of Congress is I am able to talk about what it's been like to be a working farmer on and off for the last 40 years. I can talk about what my friends and neighbors struggle with. I can talk about the history of my state in my community of 400 people an island 12 miles off the coast of Maine. In 1860, there were 79 farms in the census. So this was a farming community when we knew how to do this in a small way, and I can bring back those stories, and I can talk about what's going on in my state. So for me, making the connections between all the things that are actually happening with consumers and the marketplace, and the great interest that's growing out there, and then trying to figure out how to move some of it into policy, which I won't try to fool you, it is a big brick wall and very difficult to push through, but along with a lot of good colleagues, that is kind of our mission, is to how do you translate some of this to make it easier for all these opportunities that people are talking about, as well as enhancing what's going on out there anyway, and really helping to open many doors for us to make our colleagues understand this is policy that has to happen because this is exactly what your constituents are asking for, and how are you going to respond? So that's my quick answer, or long answer.
Gee, it's kind of tempting to conclude that everything's just fine in Washington.
It's a
No
dismal
comment
place,
necessary.
let's
No
just say.
comment necessary.
Yeah.
Wendell, do you want to pick up on the Farm Bill topic?
Well, I agree that the policy problems are huge because most of our agenda isn't on the agenda of the government.
Right.
And I just wanted to mention that there is a 50-year Farm Bill.
Which would be great.
That is an attempt to address the problems of agriculture. Toxicity, soil erosion, and the destruction of rural communities and the cultures of husbandry. And these are all related problems. The purpose of the 50-year Farm Bill is to invert the ratio of 80% annuals to 20% perennials in 50 years to 80% perennials and 20% annuals. But it's the understanding is that the toxicity and the destructiveness, the erosiveness of industrial agriculture is directly related to the destruction of the rural communities, because the big machines, the continuous tillage, and the continuous application of ever larger amounts of toxic chemicals, those things replace the people who used to be there. Now, replacing the large machines and the toxic chemicals with competent people is not something that can happen overnight, but it needs to be started, and I think the people here have started it. The thing we have to understand is that the acreage represented by the people here is tiny in comparison to the acreages that are being abused. The chief critics of the 50-year Farm Bill so far have made only one point, and that is that Congress would never pass it. The answer to that is that it's a good bill, and the people who had sense enough to write it had sense enough to know that Congress wouldn't pass it. But it's something that's there, something to work toward with patience and good hope.
If I can just make a quick comment. So it's a wonderful, wonderful document, and it's exactly how we should be approaching this. And I don't want to give too pretty of a picture on the other side of what's going on. Honestly, I don't know if we can stop this train fast enough to fix this huge problem. I really don't know if we can stop the problems with agriculture before all of our soil is gone, before the toxics are too serious in our environment and our personal health, if the carbon issues are too great with global warming. I mean, we have a gigantic problem in front of us. It's just this is the wrong time to stop fighting it. But I don't know if we can fix it.
Well, and I think our food system is a metaphor for what we see on a larger basis happening in our country. And I'm just a mayor, but as you see the massive amount of inequality in our country right now and the accumulation of wealth with a very small percentage of people, that's a metaphor to me for what's happening to our land in the country right now. Things are happening faster to it than we can understand or want to understand, perhaps, the long-term consequences for it, for the benefit of a few mass producers to make more money over the benefit of hundreds of thousands or millions of small and medium-sized farmers that are tilling the land in a sustainable way. So to me, that's the same thing that's happening with the erosion of our middle income workers in the country right now, which long-term is tremendously damaging to who we look at ourselves at as Americans, in my view. So, and oftentimes we get caught in this vortex of speed that's happening in the world right now, and it's so difficult sometimes to step back and say, really, what is happening, with our food, with our education systems, with the ideas of what our country is, that it's hard to get clarity around a lot of these issues. And so oftentimes you have to slow down to speed up. And I think our food system is a perfect example of that.
Our first intrepid questioner.
Is this microphone on? Is it hot?
Is that John Paul?
Yes, sir.
Happen to know this young man.
This is a great panel, huge, fan. And the question I have, and the thing that I keep going over is the idea that if we pay the farmer as a consumer the true cost of food, at what point, and I think it's important given the mayor's here and talk about economic development and Burbitism and so forth, at what point does the true cost of food and what we pay the farmer slow down an economy to a point where, I guess people can't afford to pay, anything for food? Does that question make sense?
I'll take a crack at that. I mean, I want to talk about the either intended or unintended consequences of bad food that we live with on a city level and we're living with on a federal basis right now, and that's the cost of unhealthy people. The obesity crisis that's taking place in our country right now, that's tied into our whole health system and health insurance system and Affordable Care Act. These are, we are developing our human bodies in an unsustainable way, given, based on what Wendell talks about much more eloquently than I, a food system based on convenience and speed rather than long-term sustainability for ourselves. So we're a long way from having to worry about the increased price of local food overwhelming our ability to operate our economy. But I can tell you there's all types of indicators on the other side of unhealthy living. You can look at today's Veterans Day, so thank you to all the veterans in the room. Absolutely. But I bring that up, A, to thank the veterans, but B, our U.S. military now can only take 1/3 of the people that apply that are fit to serve our country because of unhealthy living. So to me, I'm much more concerned about those type of issues than I am about the possible increased price of local food.
The cheap food policy has been a disaster because the true accounting has never been made, for one thing. We don't know what the true cost of food is because we don't know what the true cost of land is. I've tried to argue, and I'm going to continue to try to argue, that the true value of land is infinite. You can't put a price on it. But to say that food is too cheap is true. It's too cheap. On the other hand, you have to notice there are people who can't afford it, cheap as it is.
Yep.
These are 2 points that are very lively in the discussion that's going on in Louisville. How to get farmers well enough paid, and how to get the poor people well enough fed. So that is simply a description of the complexity of the problems that we face. And to say that the questions are lively and are alive and are being asked is simply to say that we're at work, that people are at work. The people in charge are concerned and at work. And so it's going to take a long time to reconcile these differences and solve the problems. And we may be too slow. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a reality and we've all thought of that. The thing that my reaction to that finally though is we don't have a right to know whether we're too slow or not. What we're required to do is do our best to solve the problems, that's all.
So the only thing I would add to both of these important points, I do think accounting for the true cost of health care and health costs, childhood diabetes, obesity, all these things into the cost of cheap food is critically important. The paradox we have now of making food affordable to people who can't deal with it, critically important. But also going back to the policies of the Farm Bill and the long-term policies of cheap food, a lot of times farmers in my state who mostly receive no subsidies for anything, there's very little, almost no commodities grown there, say, if I could just have a level playing field, I'd be happy. You don't have to give me a lot more, just take it away from the other guys. And that is, so, the issues around cheap corn, cheap commodities that have become, part of the complexity of this food system have caused a lot of these cheap food health problems that we're experiencing today. There is no reason on earth that we had to create this, subsidy for corn, which now has an incredible market all by itself, yet we continue to subsidize it. On the other hand, there isn't a real subsidy for what's called specialty crops in the Farm Bill. That's everything that we actually eat every day, fruits, vegetables, those things get a very small percentage of it. So in a sense, again, I feel like my meager opportunity has been to try to pull a little bit of that funding back into kind of the real food that farmers are growing every day, but it is very hard to make a living just on vegetables. It's really tricky. But if we could move some of that over there and make it easier for people of diminished means to buy more of that healthy food, we would go a long ways, and we're trying to do that. I mentioned the double bucks benefit program with SNAP, and there's now $100 million from the Farm Bill in that, but that basically says, and that's a great program, thank you to everyone who worked hard on it, but if you show up at a farmer's market with your SNAP card, and you get double the amount. So it makes it just that much more affordable. Farmer still gets paid, but you have greater opportunities to get healthy food. Same with getting local and healthy food in the school lunch program. So the kids start out with, kale and beets and carrots on their plate and say, wow, this is pretty darn good. And go home and tell their parents, say, let's go get some more of this. It just changes our eating habits and our food habits from, what had become a very diminished school lunch program. So this is critically important. It's a huge political debate. Just a reminder that 85% of the Farm Bill goes to SNAP benefits, or what was called food stamps. So understand that a big part of that is how we attempt to subsidize people in the country who really are struggling to make ends meet, are going hungry, can't get healthy food for their kids. Yet the biggest part of the debate in the Farm Bill was the attempt to cut a huge percentage of that out of the bill, ended up with an $8 billion cut. But that is, the challenge of our time.
Well, as we look at some of the things we can do locally, we have to unlearn many of these aspects we think are conventional wisdom about food. We're starting a compassionate school curriculum in Louisville that focuses on kids kindergarten to age 5 around a couple areas. One is social and emotional coping skills, so they can learn not to use violence as a way to deal with challenges. The second is nutrition, so they understand what good, healthy eating actually is, because it's not unusual to come from multiple generations where that has been lost. So you see unhealthy living or eating, and you just think that's the way it is. And then wellness is the next component of that, or prevention, and then mindfulness is the fourth, so that the kids can slow down. A lot of kids in urban areas come from high-stress environments. In terms of 67% of our kids here in our 100,000 public school system are on free and reduced lunch programs. They're not going home to Ozzie and Harriet. They're constantly thinking about, where's my meal going to come from? How do I study? Why? Where's my father? These type of things. So we got to teach kids to slow down so that they can really reflect and learn on a lot of these things. So ask yourselves in your communities, how are we starting with our youngest citizens and teaching them about nutrition?
Good morning, I'm Laura Nettmeyer. I'm proud to say I'm from Long Valley, New Jersey. It's population 19,000 and about 47 square miles, so we are firmly rooted in a rural community still, thank goodness. I find it very, it's not just frustrating, I find it paralyzing to focus on federal policy. And my question is about what we can do in terms of our local policy, to which I feel great access. And I would just say, first of all, thank you to Congresswoman Pingree and everyone who goes to Congress. I mean, that's a completely difficult, thankless job. Thank you so much. But my local government has so many policies that stand in the way of what we are fully capable of doing to return to a self-sufficient food system. We have beautiful land, we've got wonderful water. If we don't have fracking in New Jersey, we'll stay that way. We have a lot of people that are very interested in investing. We have a great understanding of our needs, but we have a lot of local policies. I'll just give you a couple examples. One is like against the cottage industry. So, you can read great books like, Financing Our Food Shed and go, oh wait, in New Jersey you can't sell anything that's made in your kitchen. You can't have a bake sale. I have a friend who wants to start a community kitchen. She went to the local office to find out how to apply to do that kind of building in a bunch of different places. And she said, well, the application fee is going to be $1,200, but don't bother because it probably won't get approved anyway. This is the kind of thing I think we can address this stuff, and we have to. And so I was wondering if the panel maybe could just take a couple of their own examples of policies that they know back home that people can really do something about.
Greg's going to say.
Well, from a mayor's standpoint, you're living in that's a tough environment there. What we try to do is remove all the obstacles to things like that. And on basic issues like urban agriculture, clearing the way for that so it's easy, not difficult. Clearing the way so that if you want to have 8 chickens in your backyard, that's fine as well. So we've taken a look at all those as opportunities to do that. And on a larger scale now, we announced a project, it'll be a 24-acre project for a food hub in our city, where we're bringing together the producers, the farmers, so that we can then aggregate and process that and then move that on into our larger users in our school system, in our hospitals, et cetera. This is a tremendously complex undertaking, making sure we have both satisfied suppliers, farmers, that are connected up with the consumers on the other side. There's contracts in place beforehand that are profitable to the farmer so that they know in advance where their crop is going to and they're going to make some money for it. So we announced that about 6 weeks ago. Got a lot of work to do on that. And we got to make sure we're listening to both the farmer and the consumer to make this work. But that's kind of turbocharged effort of what we're doing here locally.
just to reinforce, politics is the same issue at all levels, and there are many communities where I think people have started to get organized, work on their local officials, city council, board of selectmen, whatever you have, to fight back on the ordinances, the costs, do the kinds of things that are happening here in Louisville and other places. A lot of municipalities or rural communities have written food plans, gotten groups of people together who become advocates for these issues, and started to turn people's minds around. It is a huge issue because in the suburbanization of America, we started to outlaw clotheslines and things that were just part of everybody's everyday life and community life. You talk to your neighbor over the clothesline, or you had chickens in the backyard, or you shared over the fence from your garden, or all those things that sort of really rebuild communities and bring them back together. They sometimes are fights to allow for chickens or bees or, all the many things that people want to do. Food hubs, community kitchens, which should be easy and very viable. So it's like politics at any level. You kind of have to just mount the fight and get back in it. And sometimes when Washington is, completely gridlocked and unable to do anything, we look back to the states or to the cities that are really moving forward on this. And without that kind of pressure, we call the states the laboratories of democracy. Thank God there's a few states that have passed GMO regulations or, labeling laws or, are looking into these issues of how to support local agriculture. Without them, then my colleagues don't feel the pressure because it's not happening in their home state or their home city, and they don't see it as a viable alternative. The only other thing I'll say is we did try to add some provisions into the Farm Bill that made sure that more programs that were already in the Farm Bill were also available for urban agriculture, because sometimes that was excluded. People didn't think of agriculture as anything but, something that happened out in the countryside or maybe out in the Midwest or California or Florida, but, it needs to happen on the rooftop in, in Brooklyn or whatever city you're in where there are green spaces that can be reclaimed, what's going on with Will Allen in Milwaukee and all those wonderful things that are happening, contributing to the local food base, but also letting people re-engage with the practice of farming and seeing how a carrot is grown and everything else. And I'll just say, for anybody who's lucky enough to be represented by Marcy Kaptur in Ohio, she has a great bill just on urban agriculture. And it's well worth thanking her for doing that and making sure that your member of Congress, when we get started with our new session, signs on to that. And one other little thing about feeling overwhelmed by Washington, which I do almost every day. There is a way, there's a new organization called Food Policy Action, which is now scoring members of Congress on how we vote on issues of interest. And it's a morass out there. We vote on amendments. We vote on little pieces of bills that you can't always sift your way through. But it's like any other organization, environmental or gun safety or anti-gun or pro-gun, who looks at our record and tells you where we are. It gives you a sense of where we're voting and what issues are critical and what would really move things forward. So I commend that to you to look up and follow your members of Congress as well as your state legislators and local officials, because without you, we just go about doing our business every day and nobody knows where we stand on things, and we just nod our heads and say, oh yeah, we love that idea, but maybe aren't doing the right thing when it comes to voting. So.
Wendell?
I get the impression that you belong to the party of the sane.
Well, I come from Maine. It's a common sense state. Or we used to think so anyway.
Well, of course, you're going to be paralyzed by focusing on federal policy. I heard two things on the radio recently that impressed me very much. One was a learned expert assuring an announcer, this was on NPR, that America doesn't have an economy of manufacturing or products anymore, that our economy was an economy of ideas. And I thought, well, try eating one. He was gleeful about it. He thought this was a great accomplishment, that we'd ceased to be an economy that did what an economy is supposed to do, which is to feed, clothe, and shelter the people. But it had become an economy of ideas. He threw in the idea that it was a service economy too, but that's, of course, not true. This economy doesn't serve anybody. Try the post office for an example.
So
Then I heard another program in which a farmer, a big grain farmer in the Midwest, was being interviewed, who explained to the interviewer that this is a terrible year because it's a good year. It's a terrible year because it's been a good year for everybody, that grain farmers really depend on the failure of a lot of other grain farmers. So when you got a good year that is a bad year, you've got some really good policymakers working on it in Washington. And then the announcer or the interviewer then allowed to the public that this was a bad thing happening to farmers in the Midwest. Markets were bad and expenses were high, but this is the result of a cycle. Well, it's not the result of a cycle any more than the economy of ideas is a result of a cycle. It's a result of policy. It's a result of policy. Now, it's true that when Washington fails, you look back to the states. Now, if you're a Kentuckian, you say, wait a minute, don't look at Frankfurt. I think, from my experience, you can look at the cities because the people in office in the cities are closer to the problems that people are having. Now, we have on exhibit here a mayor
Exhibit A.
who really is connected here. And he knows what's going on. He knows the conversation we're having. He understands it, and he's our ally. If we took this conversation and this crowd to Frankfurt, they wouldn't know what to make of us. We might as well be speaking Urdu. And I don't think there are very many people in Washington who'd understand what this meeting is about. So, the obvious answer is go to work locally. Go to work where you're competent to work anyhow. And let people like the congresswoman, say that?
Either one?
All right, anyway, let her, who has some sense, hold the line for sanity and sense in Washington. Somebody's got to keep a finger in the place while we go to work locally.
Now, Mayor Fischer, I know you have to run off here shortly because it's Veterans Day and you have some other things you have to do. So please feel free to do that. If you want to say any last parting shots or just sneak off.
Good luck to you.
Goodbye. Thank you for
Well,
coming.
there's so much to say. No, it's an honor to be up here with Congresswoman Wendell and welcome you all to town. Enjoy Bourbonism while you're here. And this is good work. I mean, it's easy to get frustrated sometimes, but you all are great citizens, and I think people have forgotten the importance of citizenship in our country, and that's for fighting for something that's bigger than just you. And this is what's defined us, so I say get out there, give it hell, don't give up, and have a great time while you're doing it. So welcome to Louisville.
Thank you. Great talk.
Thank you, my brother.
Thanks,
Okay.
guys. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
So we're going to go over a little bit on this panel because we started a few minutes late. I know you all want to get some questions. Let's just go a little bit longer. You'd rather do this and have a few minutes more of break. So Theo, you've been waiting. Try to keep the questions short and so we can get a few more voices in here.
So greetings and thank you so much. I'm very moved by the fact that the average age of the American farmer is 58 years old, and that basically young masters in sustainability agroecology trained farmers have no chance to land. So my question is, in cities, how is it that we can begin to grow not only urban agriculture, but basically community land trusts or the equivalent, where young people can begin to grow their 3 years of competence so that investors like me can begin to invest in them, but they have to have some place to grow with some soil that can feed us, can feed the plants that we eat. So how can we move that conversation nationally?
Well, I would just simply say, very good idea, and this is absolutely the right group to be out there supporting that. Some cities have some efforts going on, but I'd also say it happens in rural areas. You know, in a state like Maine, we have a huge apprenticeship program that goes on with young farmers, a journey person farm program to help train farmers who, you know, join an existing farm, work in a variety of ways, and at some point are then ready either to make the connections, get on their own farm, or, you know, share a piece of land. So all good ideas, and you know, I'm happy to support any policies that reinforce that. And I think there are some things going on, and this is a wonderful group to be supporting it.
I look forward to writing you.
Great.
We've talked a little bit about federal policy and how that hangs over us. One number I heard, and I'm not sure if it's exactly accurate, but Wall Street lobbyists got about a 7-time return on their lobbying efforts during the recent bank bailout. And I'm wondering, since we're in a conference of investors, if you think it'd be a good idea to invest in Congress as a way to help us with that, and whether you think a local, a lobbying group aligned with slow money would do enough good to make enough impact on local policy.
Also, for everybody, please say your name and where you're from.
Mark Vanderhoff from Macon, Georgia.
Thank you.
So my quick answer was, I was very surprised when I came to Congress 6 years ago. Being from a relatively activist state, I expected much more activity on the part of consumers and activists in agriculture and the farm movement. So I would say wholeheartedly, anything anyone can do to support organizations that are having a presence on Capitol Hill. The difference between those people who advocate for the things that we're all talking about today and versus the conventional agriculture interest in the Farm Bill is 100,000 to 1/100%. I mean, it is so large of a gap. I want to say that those groups that do work with us are extremely effective, very competent, grassroots shoestring organizations, and the groups that come and bring sustainable farmers, young farmers, particular interests to Washington to meet with their members of Congress have a huge impact. So yes, 1,000 times over. I mentioned Food Policy Action, which is a new organization. There are chefs organizations, Chefs Collaborative. There are farmers groups. But to the extent that you can invest more in some of them, as well as the environmental groups that are now taking on farming, sustainable agriculture, you know, soil and toxic issues, and bringing that to Washington, it really does have a huge impact. And I think as dismal as people feel at times, you know, never stop pushing that little button on the email that goes to your member of Congress. You know, sometimes you think it's an insignificant act, or writing the letter, or making the phone call. But honest and truly, people add those up. They remember. And if you can ever make a visit to your member of Congress, just don't hesitate. Because looking you in the eye, or looking a local farmer in the eye and having to say yes or no, or acknowledge how they vote, or where their policy stands are, that's exactly what moves them forward. Sometimes baby steps, sometimes big leaps, but it's really critically important.
Well, we should also remind ourselves that there's not just regulatory issues and policy on the food side, there's the investing side. There are plenty of things that need to be fixed to make it possible for the kind of local investing we want to do to flourish. So.
Absolutely.
Wendell, you want to say something?
Well, I'll say a little something. I think it's important to face your representatives and protest, that sort of thing. I've done it. I reckon I'll do it again if I live. But the question raises another question, and that is where you're going to place your hope. And I think it's wrong right now to place much hope in the government. I mean, when you, now, I'm not talking about despair, but when you have sense going up against a lot of money, you've got to be careful what you do with your hope. And where your hope is validated is in the good examples at ground level here. What keeps me going is the knowledge of good examples, of good work that can be found and examined and understood. That tells you that what you want is possible. Then you carry that hope to the government and do as it can do, and then go home and build up the ground of hope again.
Let's not forget we're going to have 21 entrepreneurs on the stage tomorrow, and I'd say they're cause for considerable hope. So investing in them is something that can be done while we build up our determination to go back to Washington. Is that Frank? I can't see.
Yes.
Yes, Frank. Hi.
I'm Frank Golbeck from Fallbrook, California. I have a small business. We employ 6 people. Got out of the Navy thinking about these issues, and that when I was in the Navy, we were just addressing the symptoms of these big problems. And one of the undercurrents of all of our conversation is this idea I've learned as an entrepreneur that when you pay attention to one metric, all of your efforts serve that metric. And it seems nationally we are paying attention to GDP and GDP growth. And as long as we do that, we will take advantage of whatever resource we have and extract as much as possible for that short-term metric. So hearing these great voices on culture and national government and finance, I'd love to hear your perspective on if that mentality can be shifted away from.
Okay, I did. He's asking a question. We pay attention to what we measure. So if we have a very simplistic metrics like gross domestic product, then we just focus on that and do everything we can to grow it, and we kind of ignore all the long-term consequences. So he was asking us if any of us would like to comment on, can we move to more nuanced measurements or other ways of thinking that'll keep us not so reductionist. Sorry,
So
Frank.
the simple answer is, you're right. Thank you for your service. It is Veterans Day, and thank you to everyone, again, for their service to this country. And honestly, I think that's exactly what dialogues like this are doing. I mean, when we were talking earlier about the cost of food, but the lack of ability to enter in the factors of health costs in this country and how that's really breaking the back of the economy today, that's a critical dialogue. And so you're absolutely right. And so many of the things that Wendell Berry talks about and other people talk about the value of community and what happens to our kids growing up in school. And I mean, there is a multitude of factors that have to be factored in. And the only way we get back to that, I think, is in dialogues like this, where people start to say, but wait a minute, I value having a community kitchen or people able to sell things by the side of the road in my small town or chickens, and all those things that got pushed out by our monolithic kind of focus on minimal factors. So you're right.
Ed Abbey said we had the world's grossest national product. And there is that, and there is a possibility of better accounting, and I think people here have begun to take some responsibility for that. But we also have to keep alive the importance of things that are not accountable, like neighborliness. I went down a list of intangibles that I thought had an economic consequence. Well, that I know have an economic consequence. The knowledge that you have of your place, that you've acquired over years of experience, is not measurable. It's not quantifiable, and it isn't transferable in the market. And yet it has an economic consequence. It has an economic worth. The knowledge that your herd of cattle have of your place is not quantifiable and not transferable on the market, but it has an economic value. You sell your herd of big cows and go and buy in a bunch of strangers, you're going to replace some gates and fix some fence. It will have an economic consequence. If you have neighbors who work with you and help you and keep you out of that cash economy, that's neighborliness. It's a virtue. It's not accountable, not transferable, not marketable, and it has an economic consequence. If you farm on the right scale and know your animals, you'll sympathize with them. And sympathy has no market value, but it has an economic consequence. So it's that, I think, more than anything, is what we're entrusted to keep alive.
Unfortunately, I'm going to take one more question, and I hope the other questioners understand we did the best we could here. Thank you for trying. Hopefully, we'll get in another session. So last question.
Hi, I'm Cassa Heron from Kentucky. And I've been working on this work and came to the work through Community Farm Alliance and working on small farmers policy issues, both in Frankfurt and on local communities here in the state. And while over the years I've seen both local and federal policy responses to supporting small farmers and really helping to push the needle, there seems still to be this uneven balance between helping poor people participate in the system, and not from service-based solutions like the Double Up Bucks program. It's great, and we helped pilot one of those programs here in the farmers market here in Kentucky, but we haven't seen the policy solutions to help poor people participate in market-based solutions, market-based programs. So I'm talking about things that would help business development in urban communities. And I wish that Mayor Fischer hadn't been able to leave. He's the mayor of Louisville, he's not the mayor of farmers, and he's been really successful in helping to support regional and small farmers and bringing those policymakers from the region into looking at the work. But there's been this absence of policy responses that really help poor people participate as entrepreneurs in the system. And I'm just wondering, particularly from the Congresswoman, have you thought about some of those things or some of those conversations happening in Frankfurt or in Washington?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, because you're right, we're talking about sort of the food security side of it as opposed to the how to engage more people in their own communities in these opportunities. And many of those opportunities, I think, come from urban agriculture, and I mentioned the one piece of legislation and some of the work in the Farm Bill. A lot of that is directed towards figuring out how to give cities more opportunities to get people to participate, to have programs that young kids can be involved in, and learn more of the skills of farming, perhaps to get engaged in it. There's a lot of interest in making sure that more programs are available and accessible to disadvantaged populations in rural areas as well, because that's a huge problem. You might live in the middle of the countryside but have no ability to buy land or even get the early capital to get started. Access to capital is just a gigantic issue that I think we're always looking for a policy way. So I hear you completely. Finding more colleagues who see this as a way to help people get onto more secure economic terms in their own lives has been difficult, because again, I think we've stigmatized too much of farming in, well, farming just happens in some other place. Rural farming and small farmers are disappearing, and they were meant to be, this is all over, and sort of turning people around. So it's a really important emphasis, and I personally continue to look for ways to sort of help with that, to make sure that the funding, the training, the access is out there.
Any comment on this, Wendell?
Well, I do think that the problem of being poor is pretty well distributed now in the country and the city. Young farmers who want to own land are being priced off to the margin or priced out entirely. And what I would suggest is that we need again to think about intangibles. We need people in a poor community need access to money, of course, and the things that money can buy, but they need a better community too. And let me give you an example. A man I knew once was head of a small country bank over in Owen County. And a man came in, a young man, wanting a loan. And I think he wanted to buy a farm. And he was a stranger to the head of the bank. And the head of the bank asked him, "Do you have any collateral?" "No." "Do you have any credit record?" "No." "You have anybody who'd go on your note?" "No." "Let me see your hands." He turned his hands over, and they were calloused. And he got his loan. Well, you see, there's a community principle operating there that would be careful economically, monetarily, but would also take a chance. So a community is a place where people do build up reputations and do get known to one another and do support one another. And it seems to me that you work at the cash end of the problem, but you've also got to work at the community end of the problem. And everywhere, country and city, we're deep in community failure right now, and there isn't any place to get where it's any better.
I think we should call the question there. Thank you all so much for participating. Thanks to Wendell, to Chellie, and to the mayor.
Thank you. Thank you so much for taking part in this.
Because of the timing, we'll make this break 15 minutes. You'll be. Oh, there's no break now? I thought there was a break. No break. We won't make this break 15 minutes. We have another panel coming right up. I'm taking a break.